Welcome to Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Weldin. Today's story is part 6 of The Wylderwood, an original work co-written for you by Daniel Hinds and Joseph Montebello. The Wylderwood is a fantasy serial, which means that it's a really long story that we've been telling in sections for a few months now. Parts 1 through 5 have been released already, and there will be 3 more to go after this episode. Thanks! Enjoy the episode! The Wylderwood, Chapter 6. No! Harks shouted, angry and sad and ashamed and scared all at once. They staggered to the riverbank and Nezzy took her hand. They clung to each other for a moment, not hearing the battles that still raged all through the city. They only looked at the running water where the cart had been. "We tried," Nezzy said. The water burst again, and a waterlogged halfling sucked in a greedy breath. "You got out!" Harks shouted, helping them to the bank. "It's not the first lock I've picked," they said, handing Nezzy back her hairpin. "And it's not the time for questions. Let's go." The 3 of them climbed onto the shore and heard the sounds of battle nearby. Nezzy shouted, "Lochlan!" and ran towards the fight. Harks felt shaky and wild, one thing after another, not able to gather her thoughts. She charged ahead, rounding the corner of a burning tree home and running right into Nezzy's back. In the street before them, surrounded by smoke, Lochlan was facing down a long, lean elf. He had a heavy dagger in each of his hands, his hair a knotted braid hanging down his back. Lochlan stepped toward him, panting, and lashed out quickly with his sword. Effortlessly, the elf blocked with one of his knives, spun closer to Lochlan, and elbowed his face with a nasty cracking noise. Lochlan staggered backwards and fell, dropping his shield but keeping hold of his sword. The elf prowled forward, dagger swinging. Harks thought madly. Who was this guy? Was he working with the warlock? Nezzy tried a bit of magic, but it tangled on her tongue. The halfling was casting about, looking for an escape. The braided man ducked around Lochlan, playing with him like a cat would a mouse. After a moment, the squire was knocked onto his back again, and the braided man raised a dagger over his chest. Harks laughed madly, losing control of her emotions. Enough was enough. She stepped into the street. "No!" Harks screamed and wound up like a carnball pitcher, her hand a burning red coal. She hurled a fireball at the elf and it smashed into his chest, knocking him backwards in a cloud of cinders. He let his momentum carry him in a backwards roll and came up on his feet just in time for a rock to thwack into his head. Harks turned and saw the halfling already winding up to throw another. Nezzy held up her branch like a wand, her eyes misting green. The elf glared at them all in turn. His purple eyes made Harks shiver. He felt like a hunter, trying to memorize them all for later. "This doesn't end till you do, Lochlan," the elf called, and then he turned and ran, disappearing into the smoke and chaos. Nezzy helped Lochlan to his feet and he picked up his shield. Harks looked into the smoke after the elf, then turned to Lochlan. "He knew who you were. He must have been looking for you. Why would he be looking for you?" Lochlan shrugged, still catching his breath. "I don't know." Then he spoke so quietly that only Harks heard him. "He was so fast, he would have killed me." He looked at Harks with fear and thanks mixing in his eyes. Harks nodded to him, then looked at Nezzy and the halfling. Nezzy had been hit on the head, Lochlan had been burned and then attacked, and the prisoner had barely escaped drowning. "We have to go. The evacuation is almost done, and we have to get out of this city before the dross and the rest of these maniacs decide that we're the only ones left worth killing." Lochlan didn't move. "Why is the prisoner coming with us?" Harks turned to the halfling quickly. "Should we use he or she for you?" "They and them, actually," the halfling said. Harks turned back to Lochlan. They're coming with us because we helped them out of the prison cart. You can't just leave people behind. Lochlan opened his mouth, but Nezzy spoke before he had a chance. Shalsani told me to find Osla, the Frosker druid. He'll know what to do, so let's go. The four of them headed toward the north wall, back where the sail train had stopped and there seemed to be less fighting. The bridge that would lead back to the city gates had a bite taken out of the stone, but it looked passable. Harks could see that there were Frosker guards in the tree towers on either side of the gate. They were barely holding off a mass of dross, shooting flaming arrows down among the dark creatures and occasionally knocking one down if it climbed too high. Harks looked at her friends and said, "If we can get by that bunch of dross, we can get back out to the road and hide in the Wylderwood. Then we can figure out—" Her words were drowned out by horn blasts from the guard tower, and several of the guards jumped from the giant trees in terror. A column of iridescent black smoke rippled in the moonlight, and then the gates were splintered to pieces with a deafening roar. Harks felt splinters sting her cheeks, and then Lochlan was there, holding up his big shield over her and Nezzy and the halfling. He lowered it again, and Harks heard a guttural metal roar. Blasting through the broken gates came an enormous beast shaped like a goat, its curled horns spewing smoke behind it. The giant ram plowed swiftly and smoothly forward, and Harks could see that it wasn't a real animal, but a gargantuan war engine on spiked wheels. Unstoppable, it destroyed one of the gate towers and crushed many of the dross, rumbling toward the bridge at terrific speed. It hit the bridge and didn't even try to turn the corner, instead smashing through the railing and launching into the air. It turned to the side as it flew, and a tiny creature jumped out of its head. The small figure sailed over the brass oak trees on little wings just a moment before the ram smashed into the wall beside the river gate. The chugging smoke that drove the giant war machine shuddered and shrieked, and then, quick as a wink, the thing roared into flames, igniting the towering wall beside it. Several of the brass oak trunks that made up the wall had broken, and Harks pointed to where they had fallen. "Maybe we can get out through there." She ran along the road to where the trunks had fallen, but the flames from the metal ram had spread. The way out was blocked by a burning log, as big around as a house. Harks stopped short, and Nezzy, Lochlan, and the prisoners stopped behind her. "Ugh, now what are we supposed to do?" Lochlan said. "Really great, guys, really solid rescue," said the halfling. "I don't see you helping, prisoner," snapped Lochlan. "Wax. My name is Wax," the halfling replied sharply. "Harks, can you put out the fire?" Nezzy asked. I can try," Harks said, reaching out to the flames. She had always been better at making fire than controlling it, and Bobbadin was forever lecturing her about the value of self-control. Just thinking of her old master made anger and sorrow rise up in her chest, and the flames only roared higher. "I can't," she said. "I'm sorry." Harks turned to see her friends' worried faces. Behind them, the dross were swarming as the Frosker fled and Edgewater burned. Everyone looked at one another, waiting for someone to come up with a plan. A hulking figure came striding from the smoke. It was nearly 7 feet tall and broad as a barrel. "Oh, what now?" the halfling said, and Harks couldn't help but agree. But as the figure drew closer, Harks saw the firelight glint on one metal arm. "Bobson!" she yelled. The gentle half-giant had pulled their cart across half the realm, and Harks found herself cheered beyond reason to see him again. "Come on," he grumbled, but Harks could see the ghost of a grin was on his face. He stooped down at one of the fallen logs. "I lift, you go, you all go." Harks looked at him more closely. His blue sail train uniform was cut and scorched, and the strange clockwork of his metal arm creaked with ash. "Sounds good to me, big guy," the halfling said, and the others agreed. The half-giant bent down and wedged his clockwork arm between one fallen branch and another. The mechanical hand was like a big, flat clamp, and it strained open. He put his massive back behind it, and slowly, creaking, the log began to rise up. The fire Harks had failed to extinguish started to move along the log toward him. "Hurry!" he grunted. The gap was maybe a foot, but Harks could see the Wylderwood beyond. She motioned for the halfling to go first, and they helped Nezzy next, and then Lochlan gestured for her to go before him. "Ladies first," he said. "You go," Harks said, wanting to wait with the half-giant. "The Code of Knights demands—" "Just go, Nighty-Night," Harks said, and Lochlan actually listened, wriggling through the gap. Harks put her legs through first and turned to look up at her massive friend. "How are you going to get out, Bobson?" Harks was underneath the burning log now, but she stopped, concerned. "Gothak," he grunted. "Oh, sorry, I don't speak huge metal arm guy language," Harks said. "What did you say?" "My name," he said, and Harks saw with horror that the dross were charging them now. "My name is Gothak." "All right, Gothak," Harks said. "It's time to shake a leg, or a tree, or whatever. We gotta go." "You go," the half-giant grunted, straining at the weight of the log. "I stay." A small shadow struck at the half-giant's leg, and Harks realized that there were a dozen or more of the dross encircling him. The tree trembled in his hand, dropping a few inches and scraping along Harks's back. "Go!" he roared, and the dross leapt onto him from every side. "Gothak!" Harks shouted. She tried to crawl back out to help him, but Nezzy and Lochlan grabbed her ankles and yanked her in their direction. She slid off the broken trunk and landed face down on the damp soil, and as she did, the end of the log crunched down, right where she had been a second before. Another tree fell a moment later, and then a rain of brass oak branches, blocking the way completely. The half-giant roared once, a ringing shout that could be heard even on their side of the burning rubble, and then it was quiet again. Harks looked up at the burning walls. They had escaped the city, but they had left so much behind. Weldin, Shalsani, Gothak, and now she turned. Now they were in the Wylderwood, in the middle of a deep and dangerous night. Nothing about these woods was safe. Tired and hurt as they were, they still stumbled away from the walls, looking for safety. They walked until they could no longer hear the sounds of destruction, and then sank to the ground to rest. Harks hugged Nezzy for a long time. To be continued. Thanks for listening!